3,200 years ago, the greatest empires collapsed. They fell to an enemy with no name. That's the mystery of the sea peoples, a force from the waves, a shadow. They broke the Bronze Age, and they did it in one generation. This invasion, this forgotten event, it reshaped civilization. It set the stage for the world we have now. We'll look at ruins, ash-filled ruins. We'll read warnings carved in stone, ancient warnings, and we'll ask who they were. Were they refugees fleeing a changed climate? Were they just pirates, or were they something else? What's it like when your world is erased, when it's wiped from the map? This world was held together by a delicate web. An ancient one, it wasn't a collection of separate nations. It was a single system, a sprawling one, a tapestry woven from trade, diplomacy, shared knowledge. At its heart were the great palaces, the citadels of Mycenaean Greece, the massive stone walls of the Hittite capital, Hattusa, in what's now Turkey. These weren't just homes for kings, they were the economic engines. They controlled the flow of everything valuable: copper from Cyprus, tin, that rare metal you needed for bronze, traveled vast distances from sources far to the east. Ivory, glass, fine textiles moved in a continuous circuit from palace to palace, carried by merchants over land and sea, and these empires talked to each other. We know that from a find, a royal archive of clay tablets at a site called Amarna in Egypt. These tablets are letters, diplomatic correspondence, written in a shared language. You can read the king of the Hittites addressing the pharaoh of Egypt as his brother. They discuss marriages between royal families to seal alliances. They negotiate trade agreements. They send each other lavish gifts, doctors, craftsmen. There are complaints about the quality of goods, polite requests for more gold. It was a club of superpowers. They all knew the rules. For centuries, this system provided a kind of stability. Wars happened, borders shifted, but the fundamental structure, this interconnected network of palatial states, remained. Life for most people was hard, rooted in farming, service to the palace, but civilization, in its Bronze Age form, seemed permanent, unshakable. It was a world of immense sophistication that had forgotten its own fragility. And that fragility was about to be tested by a force it couldn't comprehend, a force that didn't send diplomatic letters. The Cascade started with a whisper. A tremor in the network, a drought in one place, a failed harvest in another. The climate was shifting. Tree rings from that time, sediment cores, they show long dry periods. The reliable rainfall, the lifeblood for those agricultural empires, it began to falter. Famine would have followed, and then social unrest. That centralized palace system, so efficient in the good times, it became a liability. It couldn't adapt, it was brittle. Then the ground itself might have shaken. They found evidence of earthquakes at several key sites. For societies built on monumental stone, a major tremor wasn't just a disaster. It was a theological crisis, a sign the gods were angry. The perfect storm was gathering, and into that moment, this profound vulnerability, came the wave. The sea peoples, they didn't arrive to negotiate, they came to erase. One by one, the great nodes in that network went dark. The palace at Pylos in Greece was put to the torch. Its clay tablets were baked hard by the flames that destroyed it. They were left in the rubble, a final, frozen record. Ugarit, the bustling port city on the Syrian coast, a critical hub for trade, it sent a desperate final letter. It was found in its kiln, unsent. The message warned of enemy ships sighted at sea. The city was burned to the ground, never rebuilt. In Anatolia, the Hittite capital, Hattusa, that immense city was abandoned. Its population just vanished. The trade routes that carried copper and tin across the Mediterranean, they fell silent. The specialized scribes who kept the administrative wheels turning, they disappeared. Literacy itself, that hard-won technology, was lost in Greece for centuries. It was a systems collapse on a scale we can barely comprehend. The sea peoples were both a symptom and the final cause. They were the spark that fell on a world already soaked in kindling. Drought, famine, seismic unrest. They didn't just defeat armies, they shattered a paradigm. They delivered the conclusive blow to a way of life that had already lost its balance. And in the silence that followed, a dark age descended. But what was it like in that moment for the people who lived through the end of everything? The world had gone quiet, then one voice came through. Just one civilization held out, and they left an account. It's there, in the stone, in Egypt. Everyone else was gone, but Egypt pushed back. And its rulers made certain we'd know they won. The earliest record is from a pharaoh, Merneptah, around 1208 BCE. On a stele, a big stone slab, he celebrates a victory. Over a group of foreign peoples, he names the Sherden, the Lucca. They'd attacked from the sea, from the western desert. A major raid, but just a taste. The real thing was still ahead. Then, decades later, a pharaoh named Ramesses III faced something worse. He called it a conspiracy, said the lands were cut off, scattered in the fight. Every territory was ruined. To mark this defense, he built a huge temple complex at Medinet Habu. Its walls are like a storyboard for the end of the Bronze Age. And here you see the enemy's face for the first time. The carvings show naval battles, chaos, warriors with feathered headdresses on sleek ships, ox carts loaded with families. Women and children moving with the soldiers, that's the key. It means these weren't just raids, these were whole peoples migrating. The writing gives their names. The Peleset, the Tjeker, the Shekelesh, strange names from no known kingdom. Ramesses claims a great victory at the Battle of the Delta, says he trapped their fleet in the Nile and destroyed it. It's royal propaganda, of course, but underneath the boasting there's a real fear, a world-shaking alarm. These aren't reports from a border fight, they're dispatches from an apocalypse. Sent by the only one who held the line, Egypt survived, but it was never the same. The pharaoh's great power was fading, and those names, the Peleset and the others, they didn't disappear after their defeat. They settled somewhere, which brings us to the next clue, the one that links these stone walls to a people we know, those Egyptian names from the stone. They last for centuries, they're the best clues we have, but they're riddles. Start with the famous one, the Peleset. For 100 years, people look at that name and see a link to the Bible. The Philistines, Israel's rivals on the coast, and the archaeology backs it up. After everything collapses along the Canaanite coast, a new culture shows up. It's distinct, the pottery is different. It looks Mycenaean, like Greek pottery. Their diet from the animal bones includes pork that set them apart. And their cities, Ashkelon, Gath, they show this sudden shift. Better fortifications, new organization. It fits. The Peleset, defeated by Egypt, were probably settled by the pharaohs right there. As mercenaries, as a buffer, they became the Philistines, so one mystery may be solved, but the other names, they're slippery, the Sherden. In Egyptian art they wear horned helmets. And centuries later there's an island, Sardinia. The name is similar. Maybe that's not a coincidence, but were the Sherden from Sardinia, or did they give the island their name later? We don't know. Same puzzle with the Shekelesh and Sicily. The Denians sound like the Danaioi, which is what Homer called the Greeks. These connections, they're tempting. They suggest a migration from the west, from the Mediterranean islands and coasts moving east, but it's a fading picture. Here's the deeper problem. Were these names for real ethnic groups, people with a shared language, a shared past, or was it something more fluid? Could Sherden just be an Egyptian word for any pirate from the central Mediterranean who wore that horned helmet? Could Denian just be a label for any seafarer from the Aegean? In a collapse, identities get blurry. People band together to survive. a fleet might start as refugees from different ruined cities. And over time, they forged something new, a new identity under one banner. The names Egypt wrote down, they might be snapshots of that chaos. They tell us where some groups ended up. But they hide where they began. This isn't just looking for homelands on a map. It's trying to understand an identity born from crisis, an identity that was mobile like the sea. And to understand that, you have to look past the names. You have to ask what started it. What could set such a vast, desperate migration into motion? The carvings at Medinet Habu, they're more than just propaganda. They're a portrait, the only image we have left of the force that broke the world, and it shows a military machine. Something the Bronze Age had never seen. You look at the ships first, that's the clue. Egyptian warships were built for the Nile, low, sleek for river combat. But the enemy ships are different, high prows curved up like a bird's head, tall, vertical sterns. These are ships built for deep ocean swells, not for calm river currents. They carried a single square sail, which means they could travel vast distances. They didn't need constant rowing. This was a navy of open sea explorers. They came from across the horizon, from waters the Egyptians didn't control, and the warriors frozen in action. Their gear tells a story. Many wear helmets with what look like feathers or curved horns on top. They carry round shields, easy to maneuver in close combat, and they wield these long, straight swords. For slashing, this weaponry is advanced. It's designed for face-to-face fighting, on unstable decks or on foreign shores. But the most telling detail isn't a weapon. It's scattered through the battle scenes, ox-drawn carts, simple wooden wagons, and they're not carrying supplies. They hold women and children, families. That one image changes everything. It transforms the sea peoples from a mythical horde into a human reality. This wasn't a raid, it was a migration. An entire society on the move, bringing everything and everyone they had. Imagine the sight from a coastal watchtower. First, the strange sails on the horizon. Then the fleet, dozens of these high-prowed ships, and behind them, maybe on land following the coast, the slow train of carts. It was an amphibious assault combined with a land migration. They could strike anywhere along the coast, disembark warriors, and be supported by their own mobile community. For the static, palace-bound armies of the Bronze Age, this was a terrifying new form of warfare. There was no capital to besiege, no king to capture in his throne room. The enemy's home was their fleet. Their strategy was motion itself. They were a storm that could make landfall anywhere. And then move on, leaving only ash and silence behind them. But a storm that brings its families, that's a storm seeking a new home. It suggests they weren't just destroyers. They were desperate, which forces the next question. What kind of desperation drives an entire society to take to the waves, to become a floating, fighting nation? What were they running from? The sea was just one part of it. Ramesses III also had a war on land, a different kind of fight. He wrote about a confederation of these peoples living in camps. With their families, with everything they had, they were on the move. This wasn't a quick raid. It was a slow migration pushing south along the Canaan coast. So imagine that, not ships coming out of the fog, but a huge caravan, a whole population flowing over the land, ox carts, people walking for months, maybe years. An entire civilization traveling, looking for a new home. And their route was heading straight for the greatest prize anyone knew, the Nile Delta. For Egypt, this was a threat to its existence. The Delta was everything. It was the source of the kingdom's food, its wealth, its stability. Allowing this armed migration into that land would have been a catastrophe. It would have been the end, so the pharaoh took his position. He fortified the Nile's branches, the gates into Egypt. Then he led his army north to meet this flow directly. We don't know the precise battle site, somewhere in what's now southern Israel or the Sinai, but the scale from the inscriptions was enormous. a collision of two entirely different worlds. One side was the disciplined Egyptian army, chariots, organized infantry, a military tradition centuries old. The other side was the Sea Peoples, a mix of groups with their own equipment. Their long swords and round shields against Egyptian spears and bows. The Egyptians claim a complete victory. They say they shattered the invaders, took many prisoners, pushed the rest back. But consider what that win demanded. To stop a migration that large, a movement of whole families, you need more than a battlefield triumph. You have to break their spirit. You have to scatter them, seize their belongings, make the thought of going forward impossible. It was a desperate, brutal defense of home, and it succeeded. Egypt held, the delta was safe, but the cost, the shock, it echoed for generations. The world beyond was finished, and now, right at their border, the Egyptians had seen the chaos that had swallowed it. They had looked into the storm and lived, but they knew the storm was still out there, turning. What happened to these scattered people after their defeat? If they couldn't get into Egypt, where did they go? The answer might be very near, recorded not in stone but in the ground. The first idea is about dominoes falling. A chain reaction that started inside the world they ended up destroying. You look at the Mediterranean as a connected system, cities and kingdoms all linked. If one part fails, the shock moves through the whole network. So this theory says the Sea Peoples weren't some outside force from a distant land. They were from inside that collapsing system. Refugees who became raiders, there are the names Egypt wrote down, the Lucca. That name appears in Hittite records for people living on the southwest coast of Anatolia, modern Turkey. The Hittites called them troublesome, known for raiding coasts. So you have a group already on the sea with a history of hitting ships. When the Hittite Empire started to fail from drought and internal pressure, the Lucca would have lost their overlord. Their local economy tied to that empire would have collapsed, and when the system that feeds you disappears, you take to your ships. You look for food, for wealth, for a new place. Then names that sound Greek, the Denion, which echoes the Danaoi from Homer, the Akawasha, possibly the Aegeans, the Mycenaean Greeks, and at that same time, the great palace centers of the Mycenaeans, Mycenae, Pylos, Thebes, they were burning. Their whole administration vanished. The people who lived there, the warriors and sailors and farmers, their world literally gone up in smoke. Where do they go? Some would have fled by sea. They joined the growing numbers of the displaced, so the picture is a chaotic swirl. Not one army with one king, many groups from different coasts pushed by the same pressures. Famine from climate change, earthquakes that shattered cities, the trade routes for tin and copper failing. One community collapses and survivors flee, often violently, into a neighbor's land. That neighbor, overwhelmed, fractures and joins the flow, a domino effect of human movement. So were they invaders or refugees? In this view, they were both. Victims of a collapse already started, and they became the ones who spread it further. A man whose family is starving isn't planning grand conquest. He's thinking of the next meal, a safe harbor. But when thousands of men with families following in ox carts are all thinking that same desperate thought, it becomes an unstoppable force. They weren't trying to topple empires as a goal. They were trying to survive, and their survival meant the end of the world as it was. It makes them tragically human, caught in a historical trap, but it opens another question. What if the spark came from even further away? What if they weren't from the Mediterranean at all, but were pushed into it by a catastrophe half a world away? A different theory points north. It says the Sea Peoples weren't refugees from the collapse, but invaders from outside it. A new wave of destruction from a world the Egyptians and Hittites didn't know. This idea links names like the Sherden and the Shekelesh to a culture far to the north, the Urnfield culture. They dominated Central Europe, in Germany, France, beyond. Their name comes from one practice. They cremated their honored dead, put the ashes in urns, buried them in vast fields, a warrior society skilled in metalwork. And they were moving. Around the time of the Bronze Age collapse, their influence spread south, into Italy, the Balkans. Could the same climate shifts, the droughts hitting the Mediterranean, have pressured these northern tribes too, pushing them to seek new lands, wealth, warmer climates? Their journey would have been slow over generations, but if even a fraction of these hardened warriors reached the coasts, took to ships, they'd be a terrifying new element. They brought new weapons, the slashing sword, a different, more aggressive approach to war. At the same time, another thread points west to the islands and coasts of the Tyrrhenian Sea. The water between Italy, Sicily, Sardinia, a dynamic, mysterious region in the late Bronze Age. The names are the clue again. Sherden sounds like Sardinia. Tjeker sounds like Sicily. Could these islands have been homelands or way stations for some of these groups? Maybe they weren't victims of collapse. Maybe they were ambitious seafarers who saw the crumbling empires to the east as an opportunity for plunder, for conquest. Combine these ideas and the picture gets more complex. It wasn't just one domino effect from within. It was a vast, multi-directional squeeze. Pressure from the north, movement from the west, collapse from the center. All these forces converged on the already stressed heart of the Bronze Age world. The traditional palace armies, with their chariots and rigid hierarchies, were built to fight other palace armies. They weren't prepared for this, a fluid, desperate, technologically varied assault from every direction at once. It was a perfect storm of human movement. But these theories, they point to homelands, however vague. They still leave the biggest question unanswered. What was it actually like to be there, in the middle of that storm, when the ships appeared on the horizon? That desperation had a cause, drought. A long, silent emergency that reshaped everything long before any fighting started. We know the science now. It's in the tree rings, the lake beds. In Turkey, the oaks tell it. Their growth rings, those yearly marks, get desperately thin around 1200 BC. They were starving for water, and down south, in the mud of the Dead Sea, the same story. Sediment cores show a shift. A long period where the water dropped, where less came in from the Jordan. The whole region from Anatolia down was getting drier. This wasn't a couple bad years. This was a change that lasted generations. Now take that science into the human world. This was a world built on grain. The great palaces, the Hittites, the Mycenaeans, they were redistribution centers. They took harvests from the farmlands, stored it all in granaries, used that surplus to feed armies, bureaucrats, craftsmen. The whole social contract relied on predictable rain. When the rains failed, the contract shattered. Fields turned to dust, granaries emptied, famine walked the land. You see it in the bones. Remains from that time show the marks of stress, of hardship. A palace can't command the clouds. When the food runs out, its authority just evaporates. Local chiefs would stop sending grain to a distant king who couldn't protect them. Peasants, facing starvation, would leave their villages. The social order unraveled into unrest. Those intricate trade networks, the lifelines for bronze and luxuries, would have felt like a cruel joke. What's a shipment of tin from across the sea when your children are hungry? The system didn't just weaken, it lost its reason for being. This is where the human wave starts, not with a battle cry, but with a quiet, terrible decision to leave. A farming community, their land dead for 3 seasons, packs what they can. They join with others from the next valley. They move, looking for a place where the earth might still be green. But all the green places are taken, guarded by walls and soldiers. So the movement turns defensive, then aggressive. The refugee stream becomes a warrior band. They're not just farmers anymore, they're the displaced, and to survive they have to take. The archaeology shows a pattern. Fortified sites get abandoned. New, defensible settlements spring up on hilltops. People were moving to higher ground, circling the wagons. So when we talk about the Sea Peoples, we might be talking about the end result of this decades-long process. They probably weren't one ethnic group, but a coalescence of the desperate Mycenaean sailors whose ports had dried up, Anatolian highlanders whose springs had failed. All funneled toward the sea, the last open road, and toward the remaining centers of wealth they remembered. Egypt, with its life-giving Nile, safe from the northern droughts, would have shone like a beacon. They weren't an invasion force in the old sense. They were a climate migration on a catastrophic scale. Their swords were a symptom. The real weapon was the changing sky and the empty fields it left behind. It changes their story from mindless destruction to tragic survival. But if drought was the spark, what provided the fuel? What made that old world so uniquely vulnerable to a shock like that? Mycenae fell, and that was the end of a world. The Greece of Agamemnon, the kings from Troy. Their power was in these palaces on hilltops, fortified. Mycenae with the Lion Gate, a symbol of strength for centuries. Then around 1200 BC, that symbol burned. It wasn't just Mycenae, Turin's with its massive walls, Pylos where King Nestor ruled, they burned. They were burned to the ground and then left, abandoned, left to crumble for 300 years. The people who built them just vanished. This wasn't a slow fade. It was a sudden erasure, violent, and in the ashes, archaeologists found a final record. At Pylos, in the last administrative room, clay tablets, baked hard by the palace fire. Written in Linear B, their script, most tablets are lists, inventories of chariot wheels, cloth, offerings to gods, but the last ones are different. They talk about emergency measures. They mention posting watchers on the coast. They record assigning rowers, maybe for a last naval defense. The language is bureaucratic, but the fear is there. They were watching the sea. They knew what was coming, which raises a possibility. If Mycenaean Greece was attacked from the sea, who were the attackers? Some point to those Egyptian names, the Ekwesh, the Denyon. Their names sound like Aegeans, Danaoi, what Homer called the Greeks later. Could some of the Sea Peoples have been Mycenaeans themselves? Think of a fleet from a fallen palace like Pylos. Home is ash, the king is gone. The sailors, the warriors, they have nothing left. They take to their ships. Not a kingdom's navy anymore, a desperate, floating community. They become refugees and raiders, using their skills against former trading partners, neighbors, anyone with food or shelter. In that chaos, the line blurs. A Mycenaean sailor defending his coast 1 year could, after his city falls, become part of the very wave he feared. So Greece mirrors the wider collapse. The same pattern of catastrophic fire, swift abandonment, but it adds a layer of dread, a personal one. Those Linear B tablets are a final memo, a snapshot of a civilization in its last hours, staring at a darkening sea. The walls that stood for generations weren't enough anymore. The world was coming apart, and from their perspective, the end literally sailed in from the horizon. What was left after such a fire? Silence, and the long, slow task of starting over in the shadows of ruins. Egypt carved its victory in stone, but the Hittite Empire left nothing. Just silence. Their capital was Hattusa, a fortress city in the highlands of Anatolia, a rival to Egypt for centuries, immense walls, grand gates, and then, around 1180 BC, it was gone. The city was burned, not a palace fire. This was systematic, and then it was abandoned. The people just walked away, left the blackened stones to the wind. There are no last-minute tablets here, no final boasts. The Hittite Empire was a superpower, diplomatic, military, and it vanished almost overnight. The causes are a puzzle. The empire was already straining. A people called the Cascade from the northern mountains had been a constant pressure, raiding the frontiers. More drought meant less food. Less food for the army holding those frontiers. The state grew weaker, and then the sea, the vulnerable southern coast of Anatolia. That was the Hittite window to the Mediterranean. It was exposed. This is where the shadow of the Sea Peoples falls. We have no Hittite record saying they were attacked directly, but it fits the pattern. If fleets were ravaging Cyprus and the Syrian coast, then Hattus's trade lifelines were cut. Its coastal cities, like Ugarit, the one that sent that desperate final letter, they would have fallen first. Isolating the inland capital, the empire might have been bled dry, its economy strangled, before any enemy ever reached its mighty walls. The true impact wasn't just a city burning. It was the void it created. The Hittite Empire was a keystone in the arch of Bronze Age power. Its treaties with Egypt maintained a balance. Its authority held a vast region in check. When that keystone was pulled out, the entire arch collapsed. A massive power vacuum opened across Anatolia and the Levant. No central authority left to resist movement. To patrol trade routes, to enforce order, into this void rushed everyone, the displaced, the desperate, the ambitious. The migrating sea peoples, now with no great army to block them, could move more freely. Other groups held in check by Hittite might began to move and expand. The collapse became a chain reaction, accelerating wildly, because the one force capable of slowing it had simply ceased to exist. The silent fall of Hattusa didn't just mark an empire's end. It was the moment the old world's political gravity failed, and everything started spinning into chaos. We have one city that left a voice behind, a message, not a monument, a plea for help written in total fear. That city was Ugarit, a wealthy port on the Syrian coast. It was a cosmopolitan place where languages mixed, where goods came in from Cyprus, from Anatolia, from Egypt. Its wealth came from the sea, and that sea brought its end. In the ruins, archaeologists found a small clay tablet. It was in a kiln, ready to be fired into a permanent record, but it never was. The fire that baked it was the fire that destroyed the city. The tablet is a letter from the last king of Ugarit, Amurapi. He's writing to the ruler of Elashia, which is Cyprus, and the words are frantic. The king of Elashia had written first, warning of enemy ships. He asked for help. Amurapi's reply is just helplessness. He says, "My father, look, the enemy's ships came. My cities were burned. They did evil things here." Then he gives the devastating reason. All his troops, his chariots, they're stationed with the Hittite army far to the north. All his ships are out on a mission to the land of the Lucca. The city's defenses are gone. There's nothing left to send. He ends with that line. The country is abandoned to itself. That unsent letter is more than a document. It's a window into the final hours. You feel the panic, the realization the safety net is gone. The Hittite allies are collapsing. His own military is deployed elsewhere, fighting a threat that's already behind him. Those ships he mentions, sent to the land of the Lucca, that's the tragedy. The Lucca are named by the Egyptians as sea peoples, so Ugarit's own navy was off fighting the very enemy sailing toward its undefended harbor. The system had failed. The mutual defense agreements, the web of alliances, it meant nothing when every place was under attack at once. There was no cavalry coming. No fleet on the horizon, just a king, alone, writing a message he knew would arrive too late. The enemy ships came, and Ugarit was erased, never rebuilt. That single, unbaked tablet captures the collapse. It wasn't just armies losing battles. It was a world losing its connections, its responses, until every city was an island, waiting for the wave to break. The wave broke, and the sea didn't go back. It settled. After the fires along the coast of Canaan, there was a new reality. The Peleset, the group Ramesses III named, they weren't raiders anymore. They became the Philistines. They would shape this land for centuries. The Egyptian records say they defeated them, but the story doesn't end there. In a twist, the pharaohs probably resettled these defeated warriors right here on the coastal plain. A buffer against more chaos, a source of mercenaries, so the invaders, in a way, were given a home by the empire that stopped them. You look at their cities Ashkelon, Ekron, Gath, and archaeology shows a culture that arrived fully formed. Foreign, you walk through the layers of ash and rebuilding and you see a sudden change. The pottery is completely different, not Canaanite styles. It has precise geometric patterns. Birds and spirals, it looks Mycenaean, like pottery from the ruined palaces of Greece. In the homes, you find central hearths. That's an Aegean thing. Not the courtyard ovens their Canaanite neighbors used, and then the animal bones. A significant number are from pigs. That was a clear cultural marker. The local populations largely avoided pork. For these new settlers, it was part of their diet, part of their identity. This wasn't a refugee camp. These were planned, fortified cities from the start. An urbanized, militarized elite imposing their way of life. For a few generations, they maintained a distinct separateness, a powerful coastal confederation. They had a mastery of iron which gave them a military edge. Their famous clashes with the emerging Israelites, those stories in the Hebrew Bible, they speak to this period of rivalry. Two peoples defining themselves against one another, but time works on everyone. Over the centuries, the sharp lines began to blur. Their pottery styles slowly absorbed local influences. Their language faded, replaced by the local Semitic tongue. They began to worship some Canaanite gods alongside their own. The assimilation was slow but inevitable. Yet they never fully disappeared. They remained a distinct political force, the Philistines of legend, until their cities were finally absorbed by later empires. This settlement is perhaps the clearest outcome of the entire collapse. The Sea Peoples weren't a ghost story. They were real people who left a permanent mark on the map. Their arrival didn't just destroy an old world. It actively built a new one, stitching a piece of Aegean culture into the fabric of the Levant. It forces you to see them not just as a force of destruction, but as a people seeking a place to belong. And if the Philistines found their home here, what about the other names from the Egyptian lists? The Sherden, the Shekelesh. Did they find a distant shore to call their own? Leaving a quieter trace for us to find. Their weapons showed the change. You wouldn't see the old weapons, not the chariot, not the thrusting spear. You'd see a long, straight sword. Made for slashing, earlier swords were shorter, made for stabbing, from a chariot maybe. This new sword was longer. It had a strong ridge down the center. That let it slash through armor, cut and hack in close combat. It was a weapon for a different fighter, a foot soldier in the thick of it, not a noble riding above. That sword meant a new way of fighting, and it pointed to a new order where the infantryman's strength started to rival the chariot warriors. Their defense tells the same story. In the carvings, many carry round shields, not the tall, body-length shields, smaller ones, lighter. A round shield is versatile. You can move it easily in a crowd. It suggests fighters who could lock shields together, form a wall. You get an early glimpse of something, the phalanx, that dense infantry formation. It would define warfare later in the Iron Age, in Greece. The Sea Peoples, in their fight for survival, might have been early users of that tactic. They fought as a coordinated mass, not as individuals. That evolution came from necessity. When you're outnumbered, far from home, cohesion is your greatest weapon, but their biggest impact might have been accidental. It was about the material. The Bronze Age was named for bronze, an alloy of copper and tin. Copper was common. Tin was the problem. It was rare, very rare. Sources were few and far apart. The whole system of palace armies, their bronze gear, depended on long trade routes from Afghanistan to the Mediterranean. The chaos the Sea Peoples caused shattered those routes. Ports like Ugarit burned. Merchant ships stopped. The tin stopped coming. In that crisis, societies had to adapt. They turned to a metal they knew but had overlooked for weapons. Iron ore is everywhere, in hillsides, in bogs. You don't need a vast network to get it. But working iron is hard. It needs higher heat, skilled smithing. The collapse created the right conditions. The old bronze smithing elites were gone. The palaces that controlled bronze were ruins. In the smaller, poorer communities after, local blacksmiths experimented. They learned to carburize iron. Turn it into steel. Slowly, a weapon for the common man came out of the forges. An iron sword wasn't as pretty at first, but it was harder, sharper, and you could make it from the rocks in your own valley. You didn't need a king or an empire, so their legacy is a paradox. They destroyed a world built on bronze, but by breaking that system, they cleared the ground for the Age of Iron. They helped dismantle chariot warfare. They hinted at the infantry armies to come. Their violence was a brutal catalyst. It didn't just topple kingdoms. It forced a revolution in technology, in military thinking. The world they left was poorer, darker, but also more self-sufficient and poised for a very different future. We can place the Philistines along the Canaanite coast. We can hear name echoes in Sardinia, maybe Sicily, but for the sea peoples themselves, there's no clear origin point. No homeland, no capital to dig up. If they were a proper empire, a unified nation, you'd expect to find its heart. You'd expect layers of their pottery showing that long development. You'd expect royal tombs filled with their own style of goods. That absence, that silence, is what shifts the whole picture. It means they likely weren't a traditional kingdom. They were something more fluid and, in a way, more modern in its tragedy. So don't think of an invading army. Think of a coalition, a temporary alliance born from collapse. Picture the mixture: Mycenaean sailors, their palaces gone; Anatolian farmers, their fields gone; metal workers from Cyprus, their trade gone; and seasoned pirates from the Lycian coast, the Lucca, who knew every sea lane. Each group had lost its home, each brought a skill. Sailors knew ships, farmers knew how to organize supplies for a moving group, warriors knew combat. Pirates knew where the rich ports were. They banded together not from shared blood but shared necessity. Survival was their only flag. That's why their material culture is so hard to find. They didn't have one style of pottery to leave behind. They used what they could get. They repaired Mycenaean cups. They used Canaanite jars. They wore Egyptian armor taken in battle. Their identity wasn't in their artifacts. It was in their action, in their movement. They were archaeological ghosts because a home was precisely what they didn't have. Their power was mobility. Their terrifying strength was having nothing left to lose. A settled kingdom has a center, a capital to protect, fields to harvest, a dynasty to continue. The sea peoples had none of that. They were a storm you couldn't pin down. You couldn't march an army to their homeland because their homeland was their fleet and their ox carts. You couldn't besiege their cities because their city was wherever they camped that night. That made them nearly impossible to defeat in a conventional war. You could only break them in a decisive battle like Egypt did and scatter them, and once scattered they dissolved. They settled in places like Philistia, their distinct identity slowly blending into the local fabric. So the search for a single homeland might be looking for the wrong thing. It assumes a unity that probably never existed, except for a few decades of crisis. They were a symptom, a world coming apart at the seams, a human whirlwind drawn from a dozen different ruined places. Their legacy isn't in the foundations of a great city. It's in the ashes of the ones they helped topple, and in the new societies that grew from the silence they left behind. Centuries later, the silence broke. A voice started singing. The Greek poets, Homer especially, told stories of a heroic age. The Iliad, the Odyssey, they were put together in the 8th century BCE. That's 400 years after the palaces fell. A long gap, generations. These aren't histories, they're epic poems, they're myth full of gods and monsters. But myth comes from somewhere. It's the dream a culture has about its own past. And in that dream, you can hear echoes of the collapse. Think about the main story. The Trojan War, a huge alliance of Greek kings, sailing across the Aegean in a massive fleet. Their target was Troy, a powerful city. It stood in Anatolia, the same region as the Hittites, so it's a story about a seaborne alliance attacking a strong citadel on the eastern shore. The scale of it feels familiar. It mirrors, in legend, the kind of large amphibious campaigns, the kind the sea peoples would have launched. The poets turned chaos into heroism, those desperate migrations of displaced people. In memory, that might have become the glorious voyage of Agamemnon's fleet. Then there's the journey home, Odysseus's 10-year ordeal. That's where the echo gets louder. His voyage is just a list of disasters, shipwrecks on unknown coasts, meetings with strange people, often hostile, the lotus eaters who make men forget home. The Cyclops, a savage giant in a distant land, the sirens luring ships to destruction. This is a world where the sea isn't a trade route, it's a realm of terror and loss. It captures the state of things after the collapse perfectly, when trade networks were broken, when familiar ports were ash, when any coastline could hold a friend or a foe. Odysseus's story feels like a memory of what it meant to be a sailor in that dark age, a time of isolation where every trip was a gamble with fate. These epics are a kind of processing, a way for a society that lost its written history to make sense of a traumatic break. The grandeur of the Bronze Age palaces became the grandeur of mythical heroes. The terrifying mobility of sea raiders became the archetypal voyage. The poets took the raw material of collapse, the burned cities, the lost ships, the unfamiliar faces. And they gave it a shape, a narrative shape. They gave it meaning, so we can't look to Homer for facts, but we can listen for the reverberations. The stories are a long shadow. A shadow cast by a real historical sunset. They remind us that history isn't just what happened. It's what is remembered, and how it's remembered shapes who we become. 3,000 years ago, the echoes aren't just whispers. They're a mirror, a pattern we recognize. The sea peoples, they're a case study in how civilizations unravel. A world that was deeply connected. A drought in one place meant famine somewhere else. A single trade route fails, and a distant kingdom is crippled. That interdependence, that fragility, it feels modern. Our own systems now, supply chains, energy networks, digital links, a similar interconnection, and with it, a shared vulnerability. The Bronze Age collapse shows that when multiple stresses converge, the whole network can fail, not in pieces, all at once. Think about the triggers. Climate shifts turning fertile land to dust, resources becoming scarce like tin for bronze. Then the human response to those pressures, movement. The carvings at Medinet Habu, they're not just art. They're a portrait of a migration crisis. Families in ox carts, whole communities on the move, looking for safety, stability. They moved until they met fortified borders, until they clashed with empires protecting their own. That confrontation, the displaced and the established, reshaping cultural maps, it's a dynamic repeated throughout history. Right up to today, it pushes us past simple labels. Invader or victim, it asks us to see a chain. Environmental hardship pushes people, and that movement becomes a force that reshapes everything. Studying this collapse challenges a comforting idea. That great historical change comes from a single villain, a simple event. The fall wasn't just the sea peoples. It wasn't just the drought or earthquakes or failed diplomacy. It was the combination, all these factors feeding into each other. A climate event led to crop failure. Crop failure led to social unrest, weakened states. Weakened states couldn't protect trade routes or frontiers. That power vacuum invited movement, conflict. The migrants, in their desperation, became the final blow to a system already on the brink. This interplay, environmental stress, human mobility, societal resilience, or the lack of it, that's the core lesson. Resilience isn't about the highest walls. It's about flexibility, the ability to adapt, to absorb shock, to find new ways when the old ways vanish. So the story of the Sea Peoples is more than an archaeological mystery. It's a deep-time perspective on what builds and breaks a world. It asks what happens when a civilization's foundations are shaken by changes beyond its control. And it suggests the ultimate test for any society may not be its peak of power, but how it weathers the storm when multiple crises arrive at once. In their silent ashes, there's a question for our own age. In a world of deepening connections and growing pressures, where do our vulnerabilities lie? And what does true resilience look like? The ground keeps the last record. Under the ruins of old cities, in the squares of a dig, you see a line, a dark layer in the earth. It's ash, charcoal, broken mud brick, and smashed pottery. Archaeologists have a name for it, a destruction layer, and all across the eastern Mediterranean, from Greece to the Levant, that same dark line shows up in the soil. They date it by the pottery styles and radiocarbon to around 1200 BCE. This isn't from one house fire or a local fight. The scale is the same, and it's catastrophic. Site after site, the dirt tells the same story. A living city, then a thick band of violent fire, and then quiet or a different kind of rebirth. That layer is the physical echo. It's the ash from the granaries at Pylos, the soot from the royal archives at Ugarit, the fallen stones from the great walls of Hattusa, and in some places inside that layer, they've found individuals who weren't given a formal burial. Those finds are treated with care as clues to a sudden crisis that overwhelmed the normal customs. They point to a moment of real rupture where the old order just stopped functioning. It's sobering, tangible proof the collapse wasn't a slow fade. It was a fast, violent unraveling. Then, at certain sites, something happens in the layers above that ash. In cities along the coast, in what's now Israel and Gaza, the pottery changes completely. Right on top of the destruction debris, a new style appears. It's called Philistine bichromeware. Bichrome means two colors. This pottery has bold, geometric patterns, loops, spirals, stylized birds, in red and black paint on a white background. It doesn't look anything like the local Canaanite pottery from the layers below, but it looks a lot like pottery from the Aegean world, from the Mycenaean culture that had just fallen apart. That sequence in the ground is the archaeological smoking gun. The dark layer of ash is the violent break, the catastrophe. The sudden appearance of this foreign pottery right above it is the new cultural presence, the settlers. It gives you a timeline you can touch. First, destruction, then resettlement by people with a different material culture. This is how we get past the boastful texts of Pharaoh Ramesses or the desperate letter from Ugarit. We go to the site, dig down, and read the story written in soil and broken pottery. The evidence doesn't tell us the names these people used for themselves, but it shows us where they arrived and what they brought. Their distinct pottery becomes their signature in the record, a quiet statement of identity in a new land. So if the texts give us the drama and the names, the archaeology gives us the stage and the props. It turns legend into a sequence of events you can hold. But what did these new arrivals build on the stages they had taken? That final layer of ash and pottery. It tells a deeper story, a story of interdependence and how that strength can become a weakness. These Bronze Age empires, they weren't isolated, they were nodes in a web. A vast web of trade, of diplomacy, of shared knowledge. It's like a modern financial network. One major bank fails, the shock ripples outward, threatens every connected institution. The Bronze Age world worked like that. The Hittites needed copper from Cyprus. Mycenaean Greece needed tin from far away for their bronze. Egypt traded gold and grain for timber, for luxuries. This wasn't just commerce, it was their lifeblood, their economies, their military power. They were bound by treaties, by royal marriages, by a shared culture. This interdependence created stability, wealth, a golden age, but it also created systemic risk, the risk that one failure brings down the whole system. And that's what happened. The system was stressed by external shocks, prolonged drought, crop failure, famine that strained the social contracts, made kingdoms unstable internally. Seismic activity too, damaging cities, damaging infrastructure. These were slow-moving pressures. They made the network fragile, brittle. Then came the spark. The Sea Peoples, they didn't create the tinderbox, they ignited it. Their raids targeted the vulnerable points, the coastal ports, the trade hubs, the supply lines. Ugarit fell. That wasn't just a city burning, it was a critical switchboard going dead. The Hittite capital was abandoned. That wasn't just an empire vanishing. It was a keystone removed, a whole political arch collapsing. Each collapse made the next one more likely. A chain reaction. The lesson is profound. Vulnerability is baked into the structure of a complex, globalized system. The connections that provide resilience in good times, they become conduits for catastrophe in bad times. The palaces were magnificent, but centralized, inflexible. Their economies depended on long supply chains, fragile chains. When those chains snapped, there was no backup, no local source for tin. No decentralized way to maintain literacy, to maintain administration. The entire sophisticated edifice was built on assumptions, consistent climate, stable trade routes, reliable neighbors. When those assumptions proved false, the system couldn't adapt. It broke. The Sea Peoples were the immediate cause, the visible force, but they were operating in a landscape of opportunity, a system already pushed to the brink. Their success was a symptom, a deeper sickness. A warning in ash and silence about what happens when complexity outpaces resilience, and it raises a question, one that echoes beyond ancient history. In our own interconnected world, where are our points of systemic risk, and what unseen sparks are waiting in the darkness? One of those Egyptian names, the Sherden. You can see them in the carvings at Medinet Habu. Their helmets are different. They have a distinct shape with two curved horns coming up from the sides and a disc or a sphere at the very top. It's a unique piece of gear, a signature. And then, over 1,000 miles to the west, there's Sardinia. The Nuragic civilization was there in the Bronze Age. They built those stone towers, the Nuragi, and they left behind hundreds of small bronze figurines. Many of them are warriors. They're shown with round shields, long swords, and on their heads helmets with two horns. The resemblance is striking. It's too specific. It opens a possibility. Could warriors from Sardinia have sailed east? The timeline fits. The Nuragic culture was at its peak then, skilled with metal, skilled at sailing. They had the ships, they had the weapons. It might not have been their entire people moving. It could have started smaller. A band of warriors, maybe hired as mercenaries, or raiders drawn by wealth in the older lands to the east. Once there, in the middle of the collapse, they could have joined that larger mix of groups the Egyptians called the Sea Peoples. They brought their horned helmets with them. That piece of their identity ended up on the temple walls. The connection is debated. Horned helmets appear elsewhere. Similar art doesn't prove people moved. But if it's real, it changes the map. It means the shockwaves of the collapse, or the forces behind it, reached into the central Mediterranean. The upheaval wasn't just the Aegean, the Levant. It implicated islands far to the west, pulling them into that network of movement and conflict. The story gets more complex. It wasn't just the East falling apart. It suggests a wider world in motion, where warriors from the Western Islands could end up fighting pharaohs by the Nile. Their bronze figurines, maybe once offerings, become these silent hints of a journey lost to time. The world didn't end, it just got simpler. The palaces, the empires, that whole interconnected system, it was gone. What came after was smaller, harder, more resilient in the long run. The great bureaucracies vanished. Their complex record-keeping went with them. The vast trade networks for tin and copper fell silent. People retreated. They gathered in smaller settlements on hilltops, places that were easier to defend. Life became intensely local. You relied on your village, your clan, the land you could see from your walls. This wasn't a step backward into ignorance. It was an adaptation, a necessary one for a world that had become dangerously unstable. The scale of ambition shrank, but the focus on survival sharpened. In this quieter, more fragmented landscape, seeds were planted, pushing slowly through the ash. The most significant seed was iron. With the bronze trade shattered, communities had to find an alternative. And iron ore was everywhere, in local hills, in bogs. Working it was difficult. It required new skills, hotter fires, but it didn't depend on a king or a faraway mine. Local blacksmiths, no longer bound to a palace workshop, began to experiment. They learned to carburize the metal, to hammer it into something harder than bronze. This was a democratization of technology. A village could now arm its own fighters with weapons forged from the local landscape. The age of iron began not in a royal capital, but in 1,000 scattered forges. Each one a small beacon of self-sufficiency. A similar revolution happened with writing. The old scripts, like Linear B and cuneiform, were complex. They required years of training. A whole class of scribes supported by the palace. When the palaces burned, that knowledge nearly vanished, but the need to record didn't disappear. In this period, along the Levantine coast, a simpler system was refined. One that used a small set of symbols for consonant sounds. The alphabet. It was portable, easier to learn. It didn't need a vast administrative state to sustain it. It was a tool for merchants, for poets, for everyday communication. This innovation would eventually give us the letters you're hearing right now. The old complexity was replaced by a new, more accessible efficiency. And on this cleared political stage, new actors stepped forward. Without the overshadowing power of the Hittites or the Egyptian Empire, smaller groups could coalesce. Could grow. The Phoenician city-states like Tyre and Sidon became the new masters of maritime trade. Their ships reopened the Mediterranean. The Israelites and Arameans formed kingdoms in the highlands and deserts. And in Greece, after centuries of silence, communities began to reorganize. They would eventually forge the city-states, the philosophy, the art we call classical. None of this would have been possible or would have taken the shape it did without the cataclysm that came before. The Sea Peoples, in their brutal way, didn't just destroy a world. They forced a hard reset. They cleared away an old, rigid system so that new, more adaptable ones could grow. The darkness wasn't an emptiness, it was a fallow period. A necessary silence where the soil of civilization could recover, ready for a different kind of harvest. The romantic idea of a single dark fleet is powerful. But history isn't that neat. To understand what happened, you have to let go of a unified army. There was no single king of the Sea Peoples, no central command from a flagship. The evidence, when you piece it together, suggests something more chaotic, more human, multiple groups with different origins, different goals, moving in the same terrible current. Some were likely professional raiders, pirates who saw opportunity in the weakness of the great powers. Others were displaced communities, entire populations on the move with their families, seeking new land after their own homes had failed. They didn't all strike at once. The attacks spanned decades. The Lucca might have been raiding the coasts of Cyprus and Anatolia for years before the larger migrations began. The Sherden appear in Egyptian records a generation before the Great Invasion under Ramesses III. This wasn't a coordinated blitzkrieg. It was a rolling wave of crises. Hitting different shores at different times, some groups clashed with the Hittites and their allies in the north. others sailed directly for the rich delta of the Nile. They weren't a monolithic force but a collection of many. Think of it less like an invading nation and more like a perfect storm of human movement. A hurricane isn't one thing. It's wind, rain, pressure, all combining into a single devastating event. The Sea Peoples were the human equivalent. Drought, famine, seismic unrest, those were the atmospheric conditions. The disparate groups of raiders and migrants were the swirling bands of the storm. They converged on the ancient world not with a shared plan, but with a shared desperation. This view takes away the simple villain, but it gives us a more accurate tragedy. The collapse wasn't caused by a mysterious evil horde. It was the result of a multifaceted crisis. Environmental stress, economic failure, human mobility, they fed into each other. The Sea Peoples weren't the sole cause, they were the most visible symptom. The most terrifying one, they were the spark that landed in a world already soaked in kindling. Recognizing this complexity doesn't diminish their impact. It makes the story more relevant. It shows how civilizations truly falter, not from a single enemy at the gate, but from a convergence of pressures that overwhelm the system's ability to cope. Their shadow goes on long after the ruins. The Sea Peoples, they found this second life in how we think about them. In the 19th century, Victorian historians, they saw them through their own empire. They pictured a northern Aryan race coming down to cleanse a decadent, older world. That said more about Victorian worries than the Bronze Age, but it set the idea of a cataclysmic outside force. That image held, the mysterious invaders from the sea became a kind of template, the ultimate barbarian horde. You see that template now. In novels, they're the enigmatic destroyers. In films, the faceless armies. In video games, whole factions built around that look, feathered helmets, sleek ships, constant movement. Their appeal is that emptiness. They're a historical blank slate. We have no records of their poetry, their laws, their gods, so we fill that void. We put our own fears onto them. Fears of climate migration, of collapse, of the unknown other arriving. They become a metaphor for any existential threat from beyond the horizon. That creative license gives them things the real people probably never had. They are shown as technologically superior with secret knowledge. Sometimes in fiction, they're given an otherworldly origin that says something about us. When you face a historical event that big but so poorly understood, the mind wants to explain it, to give it a face, a motive, a scale that fits the catastrophe. If the record is silent, then myth and story come in to provide the soundtrack. This cultural afterlife is a powerful thing. It shows an unsolved puzzle can be more compelling than a solved one. The gaps in our knowledge aren't just empty spaces. They're rooms for wonder, for speculation, for art. The Sea Peoples compel us because they represent a break. A before and after, they make us confront the fragility of the systems we build, the comfortable order we assume. Seeing them in a game or a story, we're not just being entertained. On some level, we're rehearsing a primal question. What happens when the world you know is swept away? How do you rebuild from the ashes? Their enduring mystery holds up a mirror. It reflects our own deep curiosity about resilience, about survival, about the human spirit facing the unimaginable. The ground still holds secrets. The Sea People's mystery isn't closed. It's an active search, and the tools for that search are changing. Underwater archaeologists are scanning the Mediterranean floor with sonar now, looking for the outline of a hull. A cargo of amphorae, anything that could be a ship from that time. A single wreck from that era, preserved in the deep, would be a treasure beyond gold. It could tell us about their shipbuilding, their trade goods, their daily life at sea, what they ate, what they carried, where they might have been going. It would give a face to the ghost fleet. On land, science offers another key: DNA analysis. Researchers can study genetic material from bones found in destruction layers. Cities like Ugarit, or more promising from burial sites of the Philistine settlers, Ashkelon, Ekron. By comparing this ancient DNA to samples from across the Mediterranean and Europe, we might map their origins. See the genetic signature of their journey. Were they a mix of Aegean and Anatolian peoples? Did they carry markers from Sardinia or Sicily? This biological evidence could cut through the fog of names and pottery styles. Point to real homelands, real migration routes. Even our understanding of the climate backdrop is getting sharper. Scientists aren't just looking at tree rings anymore. They analyze sediment layers from lake bottoms and sea floors with precision. They study isotopes in stalagmites from caves. These natural archives are creating high-resolution climate models for the entire region. We're moving from knowing there was a drought to understanding its exact timing, its geographic reach, its intensity. We can start to see how a decade of exceptional dryness in Anatolia might have coincided with harvest failures in Greece. A domino effect of social stress. This environmental detective work provides the stage where the human drama played out. Every summer, new excavations begin. A trench opened in a long-abandoned citadel in Turkey. A survey team mapping a forgotten settlement on a Greek hillside. Each trowel of dirt, each pottery fragment, is a potential clue. The story of the Sea Peoples isn't static history in a textbook. It's a dynamic puzzle, new pieces emerging all the time. A single discovery, a tablet with a new name, a shipwreck with unique artifacts, a genetic link could reshape the entire narrative. It reminds us that history isn't a finished story written in stone. It's an ongoing conversation with the past, a conversation where we keep listening. Keep looking, because the next whisper from the ashes might change everything. They're somewhere between history and legend. These pillars we build on, they can shake so fast. The Sea Peoples did destroy things. The ashes were real, but it's more a story of transformation. One age ending violently, another being born painfully. We'll probably never find a tomb with their name on it. We'll never hear a poem in their own words. Where they came from, it's a map drawn from echoes from broken pottery. But their legacy is there. You can see it in the stones at Hattusa, at Ugarit, at Mycenaean, and it's woven into what came after: the Philistine cities, the new societies in Greece and Anatolia, even the islands far to the west. They all carried pieces of a world that was remade. And looking at our own connected world now, with all its pressures, their story, it asks something of us. It says to look at the past not for easy answers or for a clear villain, but for harder questions. Questions about resilience. Is it in the walls you build or in how your people can bend? Questions about change. How do you live through the end of one way of life and into another when that change comes from disaster? And questions about us, about people, how we can create and destroy, how we'll search for a home even if it means someone else loses theirs, how we rebuild from what's left, find something new in the ashes. The Sea Peoples, in all their mystery, they're like a mirror. They show us how fragile complex systems are, how climate shifts matter, how human movement is this unpredictable tide. They remind us history isn't a straight line. It's collapses and rebirths, dark ages and renaissances. Their silence isn't empty. It's an invitation to keep questioning, to keep digging, to listen for those whispers from the soil and the sea. Because if we can understand their shadow, we might start to see the shape of our